to have these legislators arrested. And so on top of that, I would like to add that the situation that is in Hong Kong, it is spreading into the international world, where this communist tactic of silencing people with fear and also with money, it's everywhere, really. It's not only in Hong Kong. As I said just now, there have been incidents in Australia where government institutions, they have kept away from me and other Chinese artists for fear of being associated with us. And also in Canada, where Hong Kong activists have been banned from a gay pride, because of security concerns, so they say. And so the fact that is the communist government, they use this sort of the money where the brands and businesses, they would be adding this sort of suppression onto their employees and other people, and then everyone would be just silencing themselves. So this also is causing a lot of fear among Hong Kongers, and that is why this movement has been largely anonymous, because we know that for a fact, if we show our faces, then we would be arrested and prosecuted for riot or unlawful assembly.
I would like to supplement what Denise has just mentioned about the problematic law. Actually, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations has decried the Public Order Ordinance, which is a colonial law in Hong Kong. The Department of Justice and police force in Hong Kong, they can use this Public Order Ordinance to prosecute those protesters with a very easy way. That means that once if the DOJ, the Department of Justice, or the police force, they try to use the Public Order Ordinance to prosecute the protester, and then actually it's very difficult for them to be not sued as guilty. And that's why this law should be abolished by the government, and we urge that actually the international society should also be aware about this law. And apart from that, I had a personal experience that a kid I had a tutorial kid, and then he was arrested in one of the political disputes around the confrontation around during the movement. And that kid was when that kid was arrested, and he immediately asked the police officer to ask him, can he call his lawyer? And the police officer, they told him that, of course you can't, because I want to torture you, because I want to make you suffer. And these police officers, they said something like that to a kid who is just under 18. And this is a real situation in Hong Kong. That's why many people are very frustrated and angry about the police brutality problem.
The prosecutions is related to not only the imposition of the public order, but ordinance. It has to be an unlawful assembly. So the way in which the notice of no objection process contributes to that, that's the tool. And the tool is Hong Kongers then face this ridiculous situation where they have to have the police deny the application for a notice of no objection, file for a group for a peaceful assembly that is to protest police violence. So you have the police denying the notice of no assembly, therefore making it an unlawful assembly, for an assembly that is to protest police violence. So that's really important that through this kind of misuse of that process, they are really violating international standards for peaceful assembly by imposing this kind of unduly restrictive administrative procedure. The police, under this procedure, then can act rampantly as both enforcement, prosecutor, because they're naming this, saying this is a riot. But a riot is a legal process. It's for the court to look at the evidence. It's for the court to see if this person engaged in illegal behavior and violent, etc. So right now, the police are acting as enforcement, prosecution, and executioner of orders. And that is part of the problem with looking at when we talk about and on top of that, we have politicized decision-making by the prosecution. This was also noted by independent UN experts maybe 2 years ago, saying that they were concerned about a potential pattern of politicized decisions that were being made and who to prosecute and who to pursue.
There is an issue regarding whether or not Hong Kongers can get a fair trial in Hong Kong in the future. And a large reason for this is the heavy amount of propaganda coming from the Central People's Government, whether it is in Chinese state media organizations or it is in so-called mainstream organizations who quote them and cite them ubiquitously. So when the Chinese regime characterized demonstrators as separatists, extremists, terrorists, this is already setting an expectation for the Hong Kong judiciary to act, not just as well as law enforcement, not only in the charges that they decide to lay against a protester, but also the sentences that they're trying to get after people. The pro-Beijing United Front movement in Hong Kong has been very aggressive in attacking judges that it feel that have been too lenient with protesters, and this goes back a number of years. They derogatorily refer to them as yellow judges, referring to the yellow ribbons from the Umbrella Revolution. There's been threats made by pro-Beijing people towards the judiciary in general that have gone unprosecuted. So this is a real issue. Also, because of the 2016 Oathgate intervention by the National People's Congress, there's an expectation that Hong Kong judges have to uphold the national security of the Communist Party. So if you render a decision that's inconsistent with that national security expectation, you may be vulnerable to disqualification. Now, this has not happened, but this is a logic that is being used to disqualify candidates at the district council, the legislative council elections, and so forth. Regarding the police, touching on Sharon's comments earlier, the Hong Kong police also went to Xinjiang as observers to learn on how they handled quote-unquote mass incidents. And there's very little visibility on that. We know that the PLA in Hong Kong, there was some interaction with them. The Hong Kong PLA garrison commander observed some of their passing out their parades and so forth like that. But one of the most dangerous and I think terrifying things for most Hong Kongers is that the Hong Kong police now act without wearing uniforms, without any type of identification. You can be grabbed off the street. You can be grabbed from your home. Nobody's showing you any type of formal identification. You don't know if they're a police officer. You don't know if they're a triad, a patriotic vigilante, or somebody from the mainland kidnapping you. So this is a major issue. Now, for the Communist Party, they view law enforcement as their concept of rule of law or rule by law. And so the support, basically the Hong Kong police have been given carte blanche to do whatever they want. And as Carrie Lam said before, the Hong Kong police are seen as the last line in this. So the policing issue is a major problem in Hong Kong.
Senator King.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McAdams was here long before I arrived, so I'll defer to him.
Mr. McMahon, yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. Today marks a significant day in United States history. It was 232 years ago on this very day that our forefathers signed the United States Constitution. So it's, I think, with some significance that we welcome you here today to the United States Congress, the House and the Senate, to share your testimonies and as you share in this struggle, this global struggle of humanity for freedom and independence. So that Constitution, signed 232 years ago today, created a federal system, one with a Senate and a House that oftentimes, by design, there's some tension between these two bodies. It created three branches of government: an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. It's an outgrowth of that system are two political parties that oftentimes also struggle for our ideas to move forward. It created a system of a federal system with now 50 states that also there's a healthy tension, sometimes unhealthy, but there's a tension between that system as we struggle to move forward ideas and a rule of law. One thing that I think is important to note, though, is that we all stand together. This is a legislative and executive branch that we stand together, Republicans and Democrats, in support of the struggle for human rights, for the rule of law, and for freedom for Hong Kong. And I would echo the sentiments that have been expressed earlier that we cannot have it both ways. We cannot have a rule of law and human rights and the struggle for freedom with the actions that we see that are undermining the very nature of that system in Hong Kong today. And so it's incredibly troubling to me to see what we have seen play out over the last 6 months. And forecasting into the future some of the efforts to undermine the sanctuaries of democracy and human rights that we see right now. So some of those sanctuaries and foundations of freedom, as we've seen in the United States and we also see in Hong Kong, the freedom of democracy and government through elections, the freedom of academia and for ideas to thrive in an academic system, the economic freedom for individuals and economic competition, and rule of law where every individual is treated fairly and equally under the law and human rights are protected. So my concern, what I'd love for you to comment on is where we go from here, and with some very troubling signs on the horizon. So I'd like you to comment on Mr. Wong, and let me commend all of you who are examples and the founders of freedom, whose names I hope will be remembered 232 years from now in the struggle for freedom in Hong Kong. But Mr. Wong, Ms. Ho, Mr. Chung, and Ms. Hom, for your efforts and struggles for Hong Kong. I'd love for you to comment on, first of all, Mr. Wong, the struggle in elections for individuals to step forward. Over the last several years, the government has, as you referenced, has repeatedly rejected the nomination of candidates running for political office who have supported or been affiliated with self-determination. What challenges does that impose today and going forward for individuals who are willing to put themselves and their names forward? Taking that same look at the foundations of freedom of thought to academia, what support do academic institutions give to students as they raise their voices in support of intellectual freedom and human rights? And also to the economy and free economy as businesses. Ms. Ho, I believe, as you spoke about some of the concerns with Cathay Pacific and efforts that undermine individuality and freedom of thought in the marketplace of ideas and in the workplace. What is happening in these respective spheres and foundations of democracy, and how can we best support freedom of thought?
So just let me explain what's on the mind of the young generation. In the past few years after the end of umbrella movement, lots of youngsters, no matter they uphold different kind of political belief, they still have the awareness and consensus. They hope their voice can be heard inside this institution. Apart from talk to the street, joining protests, it's also significant for us for push forward political system and election reform. Unfortunately, with those political censorship, even I'm considering to run for office, and I will make the formal announcement on late of September or early October. I'm still aware that how Beijing hope to bar the whole generation of youngsters to enter the institution. But it's lucky that with the determination and courage of Hong Kongers, they just turned the whole generation of youngsters to be dissident. And not only the generation of baby boomers, even the generation of Gen X and millennials, all they joined the fight with solidarity and unity. So I would just make it clear, Hong Kong is not only suffering from the political crisis, we are also suffering from the humanitarian crisis, especially how Hong Kong police force just hardline suppress on us. no matter the sexual harassment experienced by a young lady arrested, or how injured protester would be pulled down from the ambulance by riot police directly, or how arrested person is really difficult for them and being refused to contact lawyer or even seek for any kind of medical treatment. I think this kind of hardline suppression will just turn hold of my generation and the generation younger than me, no matter on the street or get inside the institution, we will keep on together with this uphill battle, and we hope the US Congress can stand with Hong Kong.
I'll go. So yes, on the cultural side, and also on the freedom of thought side of things, it has been 90% of it probably has been eroded, where at least the whole show business has been is in the control of the communist government. Me, along with just a very small handful of actors and singers, have spoken up for these movements, but the rest of the celebrities, they have kept their silence, and they have been forced into participating in these support campaigns on social media of, oh, I support the Hong Kong police, or I am a protector of the national flag campaigns, where they have to voice out their support to the Chinese government, or else they would be prosecuted, censored, like people like us. So businesses, of course, they have been pressured also into obstructing these freedoms of Hong Kongers, namely MTR, our subway system. They have closed down stations in times of protest, therefore making it very easy for the police to arrest people, and also very difficult for the people to leave the sites. And that was a result of I believe it was an article that was in the People's Daily, the state newspaper, where they have named the MTR corporation, saying that they have been helping the people. So I do think that in a free society, these businesses and corporations, they do have a obligation, a social responsibility to keep up this kind of integrity, to at least to safeguard our freedoms, which they have failed to do so. And like right now, we do not have much solutions to these problems, because aside of the people protesting, these businesses, they are exercising their suppression onto their people. So we hope that this Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, with these sanctions on the government officials, and hopefully, if this could extend to these corporations who have been violating the basic law, the freedom of speech and of the people, hopefully that this would be monitoring the businesses and also, of course, the government institutions in Hong Kong.
From the academic perspective, I believe we need to have a correct understanding on China first. Because in 1989, when Professor Fukuyama famously declared that this is the end of the history, because he believed democracy is the ultimate form of human government, and all the ideology, communism or other authoritarianism will have no place in the coming world. But apparently, 2 decades after he gave his speech, he's wrong. And we cannot still using the mindset of the old times that we should continue the engagement policy towards China. We should abandon the engagement policy and try to use a more assertive way, try to understand China. Because in the campus, we know that Chinese government, they try to establish a lot of Confucius Institute around the world. And by that Confucius Institute, they are creating propaganda, try to influence the youth in other countries, including your kids. And this is not reasonable. Canada government last year, they started to shut down some of the Confucius Institute. And I believe actually this is a global fight because when we uphold the academic freedom and freedom of speech in the campus, the Chinese government apparently they do not agree on that. And when many Hong Kong people over the past few months, they support the movement in Hong Kong and they have organized a lot of rallies across the globe in Australia, in UK, in US. They have received a lot of threatening letters and they are being followed. Their home address are being posted on those social medias. And that's why we need all the few countries, including US, to support Hong Kong people in the campus and to uphold the academic, to support the academic freedom in the long run. Thank you.
I think the question that all of this also is related to is China's clear exercise of soft, hard, and sharp power. And so I want to say a couple of things on the academic front. In the US, we have over 300,000 Chinese students from the mainland and also students elsewhere. I think Joshua saw recently close up and personal when he spoke at Columbia what the actions of the students are. I'm not raising it to think that there's an easy answer, but I do think that we must be thinking about how do we, and I use it for lack of a better word, engage the fact that we're welcoming students into U.S. institutions. I teach a human rights course at NYU as well, and I had some mainlanders who did not want to take my course because they're afraid to take the course, because if they take the course, other people were reporting on who took the course by Sharon, human rights in China director. And then even recently, if I had students in the class as observers or whatever from the mainland, so I'm saying that the censorship is on mainland students as well. So we do have them protesting, but we also have to recognize they are all under surveillance with families back home. I really want to echo Denise's call to bring in the role of the companies, and in particular, as the Protect Hong Kong Act moves forward in discussions, and I know that it's going through a legislative process, I think it would be really good to think about and address the question of the US companies, because not only will the denial of export licenses really address the issue, it will address the issue of no longer being complicit, but will it address the issue of the actual category of lethal and non-lethal materials? And I wanted to point out that China hosts the China International Exhibition on Police Equipment every 2 years. The next one, they all held in Beijing, will be held on May 12th to the 15th. That's a really important date. And they sell, and they have thousands of exhibitors from all over the world and companies. And in the past, we have been monitoring many US companies have gone to exhibit and sell, and then afterwards report very proudly on the are we singing? Okay, not yet, right? Okay, not yet, not singing yet. But they've also reported on the millions of dollars of contracts that they were able to secure in Beijing. So I think one thought might be to, aside from, or in addition to export licenses, what about technology transfers? What about collaboration? What about them training the Chinese partner companies? What are the other things that need to be in place so that, because China has been named an economic competitor for the US, it's not an even playing field. They're an economic competitor where the SOEs are dominating the economy. You are not investing in all the US companies, but China is investing in all the key industries, and that is technology, and AI, the military sector, financial services, and then the ICT sector, which is completely state-owned enterprise in terms of the key ICT. So I want to ask one final thought for what can be done going forward. Next year on the Human Rights Council, at the end of this year, China rotates off, and according to the rules, can't come back on in 2020. I think that is the year in which the US government, I know you have left the council for various analyses of its effectiveness, but that does not take away the fact that the US is still viewed as a leading player among all the member states in the Council. You can exercise your role as an observer. You can also exercise your very influential role in working with other democratic governments to issue joint statements, joint initiatives, and joint. So I think 2020 is particularly important, and in particular, that is the year to push, because you're also on the NGO committee of ECOSOC. That is the year to support and push for the reforms that are needed to allow independent civil society groups to be able to participate. As you know, my organization had applied for ECOSOC status and over the last 30 years, and both times you can't make it out of the NGO committee because China just looks at us and goes, and that's it. It's end of story. So I think it's very important that the U.S. can raise the issues, not only as an observer in Human Rights Council, but in the General Assembly. And I know you're quite active on the 3rd and 5th committees. That's where I think it's really important to exercise leadership. 2020 is the year you can push, because China will be there with its client states and threatening everybody else to support them while they're not there. But the point is, they won't have a vote. So I think it's a good year to get some traction.
I'll just make a couple quick comments. One is U.S. has law enforcement cooperation with the Hong Kong police, and this may need to be reconsidered or looked at more strongly in the future. Second, basically as far as companies go in Hong Kong, there's a one country, two systems apartheid-like system where patriotic companies are privileged over other companies. If you happen to be a pro-democracy supporter, you're at the bottom, if not an enemy. Regarding Hong Kong universities, if I remember my count correctly, there's 7 public ones. They're all funded by the SAR government. So this puts on pressure on the type of academic agendas, research interests, and so forth like this. And there are real problems if you're considered a sensitive personality, such as Benny Tai, or if you're researching sensitive issues that may or may not be clearly evident. There's also a lot of things that happens on Hong Kong related to academic and other freedoms that are above the water and below the water line. One of them is, one of the things that the Hong Kong police are doing right now are ID checks writ large. So even if you're not arrested, your name is being recorded and associated as being at a protest site. Now this may come down later on in some hiring decision, some vetting process by state-owned enterprises or other patriotic Hong Kong companies. Former Chief Executive C.Y. Long discussed such a possibility back, I think it was around 2014 or 2012. And my last comment would be that Chinese state-owned enterprises incorporated in Hong Kong should not be treated as Hong Kong companies. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we have 2 senators here. There's a vote on, and so I'm going to yield to Senator King. But if we could just keep our answers short so they both can get their questions in, I think that would be helpful. Senator King.
Thank you. Ms. Holm, I'm struggling with the fact that we've got an island of democracy in a sea of repression. You've got a country which is now seems to be perfecting the control state. Millions of cameras, facial recognition, repression of the Uyghurs, religion, everything, and yet you've got Hong Kong. You've got 2 societies moving in the opposite direction. Very briefly, what's the solution, or is there one? Where does this end as a practical matter? I mean, as a practical matter, there's 7 million, I understand, Hong Kongers and almost, 800 million mainlanders, whatever that number is. The other piece that I wanted to ask is there any sympathy for the Hong Kongers within the mainland? Is there a nascent, I wouldn't call it a democracy movement, but at least a freedom of expression movement, or is the government in such firm control that's a fantasy? Give me a picture of where this goes.
Thank you. I have no answers because this is an ongoing struggle, but I do want to say that the control state, you've put your finger right on it. A control state is China has built a whole ecosystem of control through the technology, through the law, We didn't even talk about the cybersecurity
Most thorough
law.
in the history of the world.
And the most comprehensive because it also is built on self-censorship. It's also built on a whole social platforms of community reporting on each other. So there's this whole ecosystem, which is pretty comprehensive, that feeds each other.